Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar series from Rezolve AI. By the way, whoever did this music, I have from my team, nice music. It has a beat to it, you know. It was not sounding like a boring webinar. It sounded like a little bit, some beats to it. So that was nice. But first of all, I want to welcome everyone to the webinar, and I want to welcome Seth, my friend, and also CEO of Earley Information Sciences and the author of AI-powered enterprise. Welcome, Seth, as a co-panelist to
Thank,
this webinar.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here. I love the topic of knowledge management, information architecture, and too many times people forget that the basics and the foundation still needs to be in place. There was a great Harvard Business Review article by Tom Davenport that just was posted yesterday, and the executives that he interviewed were saying, we can't build on a foundation of quicksand. We have to build on a solid data foundation. So that's why this is so important for CISOs, for CDOs, for CIOs, and for the overall C-suite.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wanted to invite you for this webinar because I think both you and me will bring different perspective to this discussion. I bring a perspective, the perspective from a Gen AI, product version. I have been doing Gen AI product for a while, AI products for a while. So I'm coming from that battleground. And obviously, I'm having a lot of discussions with CISOs because as they plan to implement our product, they're asking a lot of questions, and sometimes they don't know what questions to ask. So I was having a discussion with the CISO at an event, and I realized that that there is some gap in understanding of, and nobody can blame anyone because this is a fast-moving area. There's a lot of information that is changing. The things on ground are changing, but what is it that we can equip the CISOs with? What kind of questions they should be asking? So I thought that's a great topic. And you and me bring different perspectives. So I come from a GenAI product side, but you will come from an information architecture side, right? So hopefully together you and me can bring a perspective that'll be interesting for the audience today. And by the way, I'll welcome the audience to jump in and share their perspective as well. I'm treating this webinar more as a discussion because there are a lot of CISOs who are joining the webinar today, and it'll be interesting to hear what they have to see, right? This is my perspective and your perspective, but what are they saying
Yeah.
next, right? It'll be interesting to see.
And what questions do you still have? And many of the topics we'll discuss will generate more ideas and more questions than really they'll answer in many
Absolutely.
cases. So we'll give you
Absolutely.
guidelines and we'll give you guardrails, we'll give you ideas, but that's going to stimulate your own thinking, your own questions, and what you need to do in your particular environment. So feel free to share that and ask questions. We're monitoring the QA tab and try to get to more of an interactive type of a session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in the agenda, right, this is what we are going to do. We are going to go after why GenAI is important, right? I think it's kind of obvious, but there are a couple of aspects that we can just go over. Anyone who's joining this webinar, obviously, is interested in this topic, but there are a couple of angles here that might be interesting. Second thing, what kind of applications are being, that you already might be seeing coming in, or you will see in future. And then we are going to focus. The way we have broken this down is we have broken this down into 10 questions to ask, right? So we've broken down the information into 10 questions that CISO should be asking as your enterprise reaches to you and says, hey, I want an approval for this GenAI product, right? Or GenAI project. What are the questions you need to ask, right? That will make hopefully your enterprise safer, more secure, and less susceptible to any risk. Kind of things that Seth and I broke down into questions, and then we'll feel free to ask any questions. And all the people who are on the webinar here, who are listening, they are very senior member of enterprises and organizations. So feel free to ask a question in the interim as well. We'll be more than happy to answer.
We like hard questions, so no softballs.
Yes, exactly. Let's get started, Seth.
Softballs
So,
too. You can throw softballs as well. We'll take those.
all right. Um, so why is GenAI important, right? Like the most obvious questions, I think. One is obviously this is a fast moving scenario. This is a technology that I don't believe you can avoid at this point of time. Even if one wants to avoid, you cannot avoid. It's happening. It's here. So it is important for CISOs to kind of have a good perspective on this, right? Like they need to develop perspective on this. I think it's imperative at this point of time. Second, and you can talk about this. We are going to talk a lot about it. Information architecture becomes even more important, right? This was something that people were talking about even earlier, but this kind of takes a center space, and we need to talk about that today. And the third thing is, are we asking right questions today will help you avoid trouble tomorrow, right? And we're already seeing, a lot of people having different scenarios. So we want to equip you with the right questions the best we can, so that you can at least ask. Maybe we'll not provide you all the answers, but we'll provide you
Sure.
with the questions that you need to ask, and perspective there, so that you can ask the right question to the people.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add a little bit to this to say that, this is moving so fast. It's moving faster than many in the industry can keep up with, right? The advances are just leaps and bounds from, week to week and month to month. And, technology moves at a clock speed that's faster
Yeah.
than the enterprise can absorb. That's just the way it is, right? There's the currency of your systems and processes related to the ability to absorb change, right? There's a different clock speed. There's friction in that process, and yet this is moving so fast. It's hard for individuals certainly to even comprehend how it's going to affect their jobs. But
Yeah.
CISOs are in a tough position because they need to be flexible enough to be able to accept this new paradigm for technology, but understand how to put guardrails around it and how to put a framework in place that is going to safeguard information, reduce hallucinations, reduce risks of all sorts, and maintain security and privacy of intellectual property, especially when we look at some of the techniques that are going to be more popular, such as retrieval augmented generation. I'm sure everybody has heard of that now, but there's some really specific things you need to keep in mind when you're using that kind of technology.
And just to add, the organizations are defining their AI, Gen AI strategy and governance and so on and so forth, which is great. They need to do that. But I'm hoping today to wrestle with some very practical, ready to use kind of information, right? This will help you write governance too. It can feed into that, but can also help you directly into one-to-one kind of situations. So what is the ROI of investing in Gen AI, right? And I think you would have all read plenty of material on this, but here are a couple of snippets, right? MIT Sloan School believes that you will see 40% increase in productivity of knowledge workers, which is significant, right, as we go along. Goldman Sachs believes that almost 7%, 7 trillion of GDP will be added worldwide. So this is the kind of projections that are being made right now globally, which is a significant number. So what that tells us is this is not something that any organization can avoid. I've heard analysts talk about don't invest in it at your own peril, right? And so on and so forth. And I've seen great transformation in personal story. I'll tell you a story. There was an enterprise that I was talking to almost 18 months, not 18 months, like a year back, right? When the Gen AI has just come in, and they were like, we are not going to adopt it. There's no way. We are not interested. And then they reached out back to us in January, and they reached out to us and they said, well, it's time. I know you were talking to us about this in March, but we want to talk to you now because we have decided that, this is something that we got to do. So organizations are changing how they think about it, and they are maturing, and they are ready to move forward with these kind of technologies. So one quick thing, what are the different kind of Gen AI applications, right? And there are five kind set that we kind of believe. So one is the kind that answers questions, and I think this is the most important kind because lot of applications that you're going to see are going to refer to that. And this is very deeply integrated with the information architecture discussion that we are talking about. Unlocking the knowledge of your enterprise is very important if you want to answer questions. Second is creating content. You might be creating a job description, you might be creating a picture, you might be creating a marketing video, stuff like that. That's creating, content. GenAI can do that for you. Third type of GenAI application is creating code, right? You want to write a new code. GenAI can write a new code for you, or create a new design, architectural design, stuff like that. It can take actions. So taking action is a very unique category. Rezolve AI comes from a service desk employee support automation perspective. And for us, taking action is very important. So you tell GenAI to do something, and GenAI then calls the right API to take that action. So that kind of things are also important. And the last is next best action. These are more around GenAI analytics. And many people would not have heard of this, but this is like asking GenAI to make sense of a huge data set, right? Like saying, tell me what is going on here, or tell me successful discussions that we had versus not so good discussions, right? So it can summarize a huge amount of data and kind of make sense it for you. Analyze my tickets, right, of last 1 month or something like that. So these are the five broad categories that we believe Gen AI applications have started to come, and any solution might be composed of one or more of these, right? So it's not like one-to-one matching. Sometimes there might be, maybe there's a company which only does video creations, for example, right? But there might be companies that use more than one functions of that. And just to follow that up with break it down for enterprise, how does the enterprise, in a typical enterprise, you have IT, you have HR, you have sales, finance, marketing, operations, customer service. So the value that you can derive from these five kind of AIs as available today, as of this snapshot is valid for today's technology, March 2024. If you're watching this much later, then probably things would have moved. But this is how we see the value generation. So, and
Later, like next week.
that's right. Next week, different video maybe. Uh, so this here on the left hand side, you see the IT, the answering questions value. The huge amount of value that you're seeing is right now available from just, making your knowledge sources available to everyone and answering questions. So we are going to talk about that, what are the risk and value associated with that. But these blocks and circles kind of represent the kind of value that you can get. And there's a huge amount of value that can be, you can unlock using these in different departments. So this is just the background. So let's get started, Seth, with the questions, right?
Sure.
So tell me, how does one determine the right use case, right? I think that should be the first step anywhere, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
are we talking about the right use case or not in enterprise?
Absolutely. So, it really starts, I think we have a couple of sub bullets there, but it really starts with, as everything should with technology. We're not just deploying technology for the sake of technology. We're not just trying to check the box, although a lot of organizations are, right? They're like, they don't know what to do with this, but they want to experiment, and that's fine. But in order to get real value, we need to focus on the very specific business objective that is important to the organization, and then break that down into the processes that support that business objective. So if it's reducing costs, well, where are all the different areas you're going to reduce costs? If it's increasing revenue, how are you going to increase revenue? What are the processes, the sub-processes that are going to be enabling that business outcome, that enterprise strategy? And so you have to think of it in multiple layers, because the enterprise goals are supported by different business objectives of different business units. And so one might be, again, increasing customer satisfaction, reducing time per incident, first call resolution in the customer service department. There might be someone else with additional objectives around increasing revenue, or speeding up the clock speed of social media promotions. So it's really coming back to, what are the processes that are within that enable those business objectives, and you're really trying to get down to that process scorecard, that process level. And when you think about AI, and in general, really any application, but specifically for generative AI, what are the processes, what are the steps to the process that
Yep.
you need to enable? Where is better information, faster information,
Yep.
information that you don't have going to make a difference? I call those information leverage points. And so
Yep.
it's really about understanding the process. You can't automate what you don't understand.
Yep.
And hopefully you're not going to automate a mess, but sometimes people automate messes and even the faster mess. But the point is, if you don't understand the process, you will not understand where to have the intervention. And AI is not going to take over an entire, the tasks of an individual, but you can have points of intervention within that process. Again,
Yeah.
is it co-piloting with a customer sales service rep? Is it, whisper coaching? Is it surfacing information for customer self-service? Is it trouble ticket management? What are those specific processes? And then what can you measure? Because what you want to do is measure a baseline, have an intervention, and then show what that improvement will be. So again, it comes down to the business objective, and then the ways that business objective will be supported, because it always comes down, everybody's going to say, oh yeah, increase revenue, reduce costs, but how, where,
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
and
And
then
I
what
think I
the
think
role.
from my
Mhm.
perspective, CISOs should be asking that question, right? When you get someone comes to you with a project idea saying, "Hey, I want to do this or I want to do that." I think the first question, obviously, and maybe some of this is pretty obvious to everyone, but like it's the first good question to ask, right? Why do you want to do it? Tell
Mhm.
me what ROI are you expecting? What are the sub process that are involved? So I highly recommend this. One thing that I have found as a practical example, a lot of enterprises are going for employee-facing solutions first and then customer-facing. Why? The perceived risk is lower for employee-facing implementations. Is the real risk lower? Maybe, maybe not, right?
Mhm.
But at
It's more
least many,
controllable. It's
yeah,
more
it's more
controllable.
control. Exactly. The damage control can be easier. Your endpoints are within your enterprise. So there might be some value in that. I'm just sharing because that is what I've seen in many cases. So that is one thing to keep in mind, but that's a first good question.
Yeah.
That
But I'll
brings
tell
us,
you, there are situations when, there's not a clear ROI and there is a desire to do some experimentation. That's okay too, but
yeah, yeah,
recognize when you're doing that versus when
absolutely.
you're trying to
Absolutely.
support that
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. That's perfectly okay. If someone wants to just go into it, as long as we are clear what we want to do.
Hmm.
So the second question is around data boundaries, right? I think this is a question worth asking, very, very important.
Yeah.
So, Seth, you want to take a kind of lead
Sure.
on that?
Sure. So just as you start breaking that process down and you have the different steps to that process, at each step to that process, there's going to be a stakeholder with an information need. And that's
Mhm.
what we need to define is what does that information need? What's the information that's necessary, whether it's employee or customer, to move them from one step in their life cycle of process to the next step. And then we can start identifying those information sources. We need to look at them and make sure that they are of sufficient quality. So again, we're narrowing the scope by looking at a defined set of use cases,
Mhm.
business objectives and use cases, and then
Mhm.
trying to look at this very specific information that's needed to support those use cases. Who
Mhm.
is it? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they need? And those libraries of use cases are going to allow you to go back and look at the quality of the data, the appropriateness of the data, the fitness to purpose of the data completeness, the data provenance, all the data quality, all of those things, the ownership. We need to understand that if you don't have ownership defined for data, it's going to go out of date. It's going to succumb to entropy, right? It's going to get disordered, and we need to
Absolutely.
have service level agreements. If there are outside data providers, we have to be able to audit our internal sources. We need to understand chains of trust so that we know where that data came from and that is a sufficient quality. So all of this is really inventorying those data sources, cataloging those data sources, and then saying, how do we know it's good, right? How do we know it's good enough?
Mhm.
What do we need to measure? What does good look like?
Yeah,
And of course,
because
good
the
looks
truth,
like supporting the process, right?
yeah, absolutely. Because the truth is, garbage in, garbage out is still true for Gen AI, right? You put garbage in, garbage is going to come out. AI is not magical in the sense it's not going to take your garbage and create a beautiful. It might be badly formatted. It might be all those things are okay, right? That's fine because Gen AI is not asking you to write the most beautiful document, but they have to be factually correct. Whatever input data you're giving, it is going to treat that as a input. And by the way, you also need to worry about your what kind of DLP is there in the solution that you're looking at.
Mhm.
How do you handle PII? Because those questions, which are table stake for forever, right? They don't change, right? These questions don't change. By the way, we have a question here coming in from attendee that I want to address as we go along. What are the key threats that you see with GenAI? How can we adapt security? So we are going to address that as we go along. So one of the key threats, as we go through the 10 questions, you're going to see we are going to address some of the key threats. So one of the key threat, for example, that everyone should be asking a question is your model using your data for training, right? So suppose I'm your provider. This is a question you guys need to ask. What LLM, we are going to talk about LLMs in a bit, but is your model going to use my training? And is that going to be available to, for example, OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever? And the answer to that is very simple, right? In most cases, enterprises, the product companies or the solution providers should be using either a private endpoint. So again, I want to repeat that word, private endpoint. They should be using something called private endpoint, which means a private endpoint is nothing but, for example, assume that you're talking about OpenAI model, right? So what happens when I use OpenAI model in Azure? OpenAI can give me a private endpoint, or Azure, Microsoft will give me a private
Mhm.
endpoint. What that means is that I will have a version of the LLM available to me and me alone. And Microsoft can push the updates to that LLM to me, but Microsoft cannot take anything away from that,
Mhm.
right? That's what the way the contract is written and the way service is defined. So
Mhm.
I will get updates from Microsoft if they change anything in the LLM, but they're not going to get anything from me if I'm training my model. It is not going to go back to Microsoft. That's how the contract is defined. So private endpoint is important for all of you to know, and it's a good question to ask your,
Wow.
solution provider or technology people.
The other thing that people are not quite aware of is that you can do the same thing with an individual account in ChatGPT. There is
Mhm,
an opt-out of training.
mhm,
It's kind of buried and it's a little bit difficult to find, but you
mhm.
can do that, and you can
I see.
say, use my data for training.
Yeah.
So
And the,
uh,
and the enterprise APIs that are coming in from all the
they
big guys,
respecting
right?
that.
They
Yeah.
all kind of promise this. This is
Yeah.
like this promise, but still, right? If you're working with a very small company, unknown company, I think it's just one of the basic things
Oh,
you
yeah.
need to, right? It doesn't matter even if you're using with a big company or a small company. This
Mhm.
is just one of the questions you need to ask. Are you going to use my data to train the model? And where does that information go? It's just a good question to ask. Same thing with PII. PII information I'm not stressing on because everyone must be already asking that question. So, there's nothing new as opposed to the older model, but these are the kind of things that I expect that you should ask. Just building on that, what you said, Seth, I just want to share one example here. So many of the solutions which are coming in the market today are suggesting that you point for example, your knowledge is in SharePoint at large. What they're suggesting is point to SharePoint, right? The entire SharePoint in its entirety. And the bot will learn from it and start answering question. There's some risk in this strategy, clearly, right? One of the risk is, do you know in each of thousands of folders that you have, right? Do you know, uh, you know, um, what are the permissions in each of these folders? Do you know what content exists in which folder? And I can tell you the answer for that. Nobody knows, right? At least in the beginning, nobody will know, right? What is there in which folder if the permissions are set right? And that poses a lot of risk, isn't it, Seth? You had some experience in
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There's a pharmaceutical client of ours, and we built a very sensitive portfolio review application in SharePoint. Didn't look anything like SharePoint. We had a completely different front end and just used SharePoint for the back end. but it was highly sensitive information. It was drugs that they were getting clinical trial results around, companies that they were considering acquiring, new molecular entities under investigation, compounds that they were licensing from other companies, and that is stock moving information, right? That cannot go out to the public, and it cannot go out to everybody in the company. Even it was so sensitive that only certain executives in the C-suite could see this content. And so the security model was built with that in mind. And then when everything was opened up to this Copilot with SharePoint, they give it admin privileges, bypassed everything, and then suddenly this very, very sensitive information was being exposed. So that had to be
Yeah,
shut down. And again, we have to respect the security models, and the
yeah,
security models come from the information architecture, right? That is a
that's right.
part of a parameter
That's
on the
exactly right.
data source. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is a potential risk, right? Someone was asking what are the risks. This is a potential risk. If you point it to a SharePoint without doing the necessary work, or any other data source, SharePoint is an example, right? It could be Dropbox, it could be any of those. And you're assuming that the folders have the right permission and they have the right content. You might be assuming wrong, and the risk is huge. One example someone was telling me was that you might be typing a question to the bot saying, "Hey, tell me the salary of all the VPs in the company," and the bot just might reply to your surprise and to everyone's surprise. Why? Because this information was in a particular folder where the permissions were not set right. And so therefore, what is the solution? There's the problem. We told you about the problem. What is the solution? What we recommend is you decide which information you want to share. We don't recommend you share everything with everyone, right? And hope the permissions are set right. That's just wishful thinking. Don't do that. Step one, you can like work, with companies like Seth who can help you figure out your information architecture. That is definitely the step one. And also just a commonsensical approach, right? Don't share everything with everyone. Share the right information with the right people, right? You should know what you're sharing and with whom. I mean, that's commonsensical thing, but in the sweep of technology, one is likely to forget these basics sometimes. And I think it's a question that CISO should ask their team. And Seth, I'm going to take a pause. Um, and there's a couple of questions coming in. So
Mhm.
one question is, how do we accurately measure and compare the real risk and benefit?
Mm.
Uh, Second,
I'll talk.
you want to
I'll
take
talk.
that question?
I'll
Yeah.
tell. Yes, I'll talk. Well, I'll talk about. I'll talk about what's hard about that, and I'll tell you what's easy about that. The benefit has to be quantifiable, and it has to be based on having baseline metrics. You have to be instrumented for the metrics to measure whatever the process is that you're trying to improve. So remember, we said we're going to start with business objective, and then the process, the business objective, and the processes that support that objective, and then the use cases that support those processes, and then the data that supports those use cases, right? We need to know what the baseline is of that outcome that we're looking for. And then we can A/B test, right? We're doing this with a large organization, a technical organization or service group, and happen to be in the medical instrumentation space. And there are field service reps, there are internal service reps, and what we want to do is refactor their content, but A/B test it. So have one audience that uses the new content, one audience that uses the old content, the old methodologies, and who is and again, what you're doing is you're just trying to test against the future state, right? What is this going to look like? So you can do it in a proof of value at that level. So that's really the benefit. I mean, beyond that, there are other intangible benefits, but it's really about speeding up the information metabolism of the organization. So it'll be a lot of ways that are not necessarily clearly measurable, but there will be other benefits. So there's personal productivity benefits, of course, when you can get to answers more quickly, right? And when you can start with an outline, a research outline, rather than a clean sheet of paper for
Yeah.
producing some kind of deliverable.
Yeah.
On the other hand, with the risks, those are very hard to quantify because there's the unknown, the unknown unknowns, right? You don't know what you don't know, and so we have it's difficult to quantify those.
Yeah, but I think what we're
Go ahead.
trying to do is to bring all the risks that we know of. So for people who don't know or have not attended this series earlier, I'm a co-founder of a .ai company, Rezolve AI. We provide a SaaS-based solution which is focused on employee supports, and this is what we do day in and day out. So the reason of doing this webinar was to bring the risk to you, so that you can manage those risks, right? Like you can ask the right questions. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. The question 2 and 3, I'm going to take a quick stab at those. How do
Mhm.
you delete data from AI model if sensitive information was inadvertently shared? So I'll talk about that. So in our product, I cannot talk about it at large, but in our product, I talked about private endpoint. So we have a private endpoint. That means, and you have your own tenant. So whatever you're uploading or pointing to SharePoint or whatever is your own information. It's not going beyond the confines of your tenant. So you can bring information there, you can delete information there, and that's it. It's not going anywhere outside the confines of your tenant, right? We
Mhm.
have a private endpoint to the LLM. That means your information is not going anywhere. It's very safe. So
I
that is the
think
answer to the. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, sir.
one way you could read that question, though, is that the horse is already out of the barn. So maybe with a public large language model, I'm not sure what
Yeah,
the
that's
conditions were, but that's
that,
a
that if
hard
you're
one.
in a public model, then unfortunately
Yeah,
that's
the
very
horse is
risky
out of the
because
barn.
I don't know if everyone heard about the Samsung story, right? Um, um, I think that's in public domain, so I
Go,
can talk
go
about.
ahead and yeah, go ahead and recount that.
Yeah, so the story was that a lot of organizations didn't allow these solutions to come. So what do employee do? If you don't give them a solution, they go use the public version, right? And apparently, in this case, someone used the public version and sensitive information was shared, creating risk for the company. So the point
Source
is,
code. It was a source
yeah,
code issue. Yeah.
absolutely. I think this is, by the way, this version has been happening for last 20, 30 years since I've been working in technology. You got to provide a solution to them, right? You cannot say this is something that we are not going to do, because if we tell them that, they're going to use something else then, right? They're going to use some other option which is not safe. So
Mhm.
don't use the public, provide them a good solution. If you provide them a good solution, they're going to use the solution, and then you'll have the guardrails built. The
Mhm.
third question is, will the bot bypass the permissions from SharePoint? Just want to make sure that I understood that correctly. So let me repeat it. It will not, right? Most solutions are built that way, that they will not build. But what my personal experience is, that might not be enough, because you might have, the point I was trying to make was that you might have folders in there which do not have the right permission, and you cannot guarantee that all the solutions out there, all the information in all the folders is the right information, right? So it's very difficult to guarantee that, and because you cannot guarantee that, therefore a broad approach of sharing everyone, hoping that the permissions on SharePoint or wherever Dropbox are set correctly, is too broad an assumption. So that's why we recommend start with what you want to share, with whom you share, and that'll be the safer approach.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that is if you configure it to have admin permissions, it has admin, it's not overriding anything, it just has those permissions. So that's how this other organization did it. They started with this Copilot and they said, we're going to just open it up to everything and see
That's right.
what it
That's right.
does. But there wasn't they weren't being mindful of the permission. So the answer is it's not really overriding it. It's just you gave it too much authority, you gave it too much permission.
Correct. And what we do is, we have in our product, you have a attribute to metadata mapping. What that means is that you can decide, an attribute can be who you are. Attribute is
Mhm.
of a person
Yep.
or a profile, and metadata is obviously of the knowledge or action that you're taking. So in our product, you can decide what kind of information. You can build those business rules saying someone who's a contractor cannot have access to that kind of information. Boom, you just have to set a rule, and that rule will be followed, right? um, Over and above the permissions that are granted at SharePoint. So therefore, you have a layer of protection which goes over and beyond, right, what you'll usually get. And that is the kind of things that you need to look for, in my opinion. They'll make you
Oh.
safe.
Same problem with search indexing, right? When you index content for search, you have to
Yep.
respect the
Yep.
security at the document level.
Exactly. That all document level, folder level, you need to be aware about that. The third question is, how do you refine the information architecture for AI? Like we have been talking about information architectures at
Mhm.
and we
Yeah,
have covered some basics, but do you want to give us a little bit more into
sure,
why this is so important, and what should be
sure.
the actionable item from CISO perspective here?
Yeah, so the information architecture is something that you can use to design your security model, right? That is part of the IA. You're controlling it with metadata. And, we've built some very sophisticated data models, security models that have been the situations where an organization, it was actually for Applied Materials, which is a semiconductor fabrication equipment manufacturer, and they would have Apple and IBM were competitors, and they could share information about the equipment, but they couldn't share anything about the installation or the methodology, right? That was a very sophisticated multi-tier security model, and it also had to respect international sharing of certain, sensitive information and so on. So the information architecture is critical to your security model. And the other thing we need to think about in information architecture is, many times what we're recommending in terms of an LLM is you're not getting the knowledge from the LLM. You're not looking to the LLM for the answer per se. You're looking for the LLM to interpret the query, and then you're retrieving from a knowledge source, a gold standard knowledge source in the organization. That knowledge source does have to be curated, and it does have to be architected, it does have to be tagged, it does have to be componentized. Rowan Curran from Forrester was just talking about this yesterday at another webinar. He was saying that, people don't realize that you have to componentize content so you can build question answering systems. That componentization relies on an information architecture model, the metadata, the isness and aboutness. What is this thing and what is it about? How do I tell if I have 1,000 of them, 1,000 contracts in a pile? How do I tell them apart? The isness is it's a contract. The aboutness is what kind of contract for what customer and so on. So all of those things need to be defined so that you can provide additional signals to the LLM to retrieve the right information. There are multiple different ways of doing this, but we found in one of our experiments that the use of the information architecture was increased the performance of the LLM from 53% to 83% accuracy. And that was with retrieval augmented generation. So there's a real value in having that content tagged correctly, and also value to your information security model. And
Perfect. No,
again, when you also look across different systems, you do need to build what we call a domain model, which are the big buckets, right? The big picture organizing principles of around products and services and customers and employees and processes and departments and document types. Those are all organizing principles. And then we have to say, well, how are these things represented as entities in different systems? Because if we have to pull information from different systems together, we have to have a lingua franca, right? We have to have a mechanism, a semantic layer to let those different systems communicate with one another, or to be able to use a single term and get information from multiple systems where the term may be represented in different ways. And again, we talked about some of the other things, right? Is the knowledge even there to support use cases, right?
Yep.
So we touched on some of those areas, so I'll stop now. And I know we're only on question 3, so.
Yeah. So no, absolutely. And we already addressed the question of LLM net
Yep.
training. So let's talk about hallucinations, right? And I'm going to kick off by talking about what hallucinations are, and we are going to talk about track-based architecture. This is, I know CISOs, um, uh, you know, this will go a little bit deeper into technology, just a little bit. We'll try to simplify it for you. And a lot of you might have already heard about it, to be honest. But um, why do hallucination come, and what is the current approach to handling hallucination? This is a good question for you to ask anyone who comes to you. Hallucinations, well, is when a bot or a Gen AI solution either gives wrong answer, or just pauses and not give an answer, right? Or give conflicting answers, right? An answer which is self-conflicting. Those are called hallucinations, right? Or it seems to make things up, right? So that's what hallucination is. And this problem started to appear when beginning of last year when GenAI came. By middle of last year, people have already started experiencing hallucination problem, and people are talking about it. And the solution to that is RAG model. I'm going to talk a little bit more about RAG model, but before I do that, Seth, anything else here that you want to kind of add?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it comes down to what is that information source? And again, hallucinations primarily come when you are simply asking the LLM the question. So when I first was experimenting with ChatGPT, I said, "Who is Seth Earley?" And it didn't know. Then I said, who is Earley Information Science? And it told me. And then I said, who's Seth Earley? And it gave me all of these wonderful accolades, but also said that I was, on the board of these different organizations, which I was not, that I taught at these different institutions and I hadn't, that I wrote all of these other books that I hadn't. So it gave me all these credentials, right? George Santos to me, right? Because it made up all this stuff about me, and it just wasn't true. So that was because we asked the LLM. Now, if we said, only restrict your answer to the information on early.com, or only restrict your answer, do not, if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know, and use this information source. And also having that gold standard set of use cases and the answers and that repository, all of those things are going to help you put some discipline to the whole process of asking questions and getting the answers. But it is using the knowledge bases and the IP of the organization to answer those questions. And then that comes back to, it has to be structured in the right way. So hallucinations are avoidable if we use the right architecture.
Yeah, and let me talk a little bit about the architecture here. So there are two predominant ways in which this technology works, right? So let me explain to everyone. And if I'm repeating for some of you, please be kind. I might be repeating some basic concepts, but here is how LLMs work. If you give them a lot of data, then they know how to put one word after the other in a probabilistic model. That's all it takes to give the beautiful answers that you get, and you are amazed on the intelligence, and I'm amazed on the intelligence of the system. Now, early on, people used to use something called fine-tuned model, where you'll upload the entire documents or set of documents on there, and you're hoping that it gives the right answer. And that's where hallucination started to appear, based on, like Seth was saying, quality of data and so on and so forth, right? Now, there's another method, which is called RAG-based architecture. What happens in RAG-based architecture is you take this data and you break it down into small bits. This process is called chunking, right? You chunk the data into small pieces. How do you chunk the data? You use algos to do that. What algos can you use? Well, there are a lot of market-based algos available, but like companies like us, we write our own proprietary algo, because this is key to everything here. Once you break it down, you put it in a vector database, index it, whatever. And then when someone asks a question, what happens is you take the question, you understand the question, and you pick up the right chunks from this vector database to send it to the LLM, right? So see, the difference between first method and second method is, in second method, you are sending the question and the right chunks of answer to the LLM. So you are pretty much telling LLM what is the question and where the answer needs to come from. So it has a lot less information to go with. And therefore, when it generates the responses, there are very less chances it's going to get confused and fall over each other, because, hopefully you're giving him the right information. And if you give it the right information, it's going to compose it nicely and send it back to you. So the role of LLM is, in this case, is a little bit lesser than earlier, right? But it also reduces this. So this is what we use, and this reduces the, so therefore, keeping the answer short, you need to ask the question, are you using RAG based architecture or no? That's a good question to ask, and your solution provider will have to provide the answer to that. And if yes, ask them, show me your architecture, right? Show me your RAG based architecture. How do you do it? This is something as a CISO I would do if I were in your shoes. Next question is about prompt. Seth, I hope everyone knows what a prompt is. You want to kind of talk about this a little bit, like what is the risk associated with prompts?
Well, prompts are the questions that you're asking the LLM. And what people try to do is they try to, ask questions in such a way to get to prohibited content or prohibited answers or unsavory answers and so on. And that happens with public LLMs. That's why what the large providers are doing is they're red teaming, right? They're
Yep,
putting this through a quality control process
yep,
and
yep,
hiring teams of people to try to break it and try to get it to, give, hack into a system, or to provide, bomb making instructions or whatever, or illicit drug design,
yeah,
design and development,
yeah,
whatever it might be. But what we want to do is think about the knowledge that we're trying to retrieve and consider prompt design with knowledge design. So the knowledge contains metadata and the prompt contains metadata. The prompt is asking a specific question about something, right? About a contract, an agreement, a support piece of information, a customer, a product, whatever it might be, but we're asking specific questions. And then we are, again, using RAG, so we're controlling the answers to some degree. And we're also turning the temperature down on the response, right? On the LLM. And temperature can go from 0 to 1. 1 is more creative. 0 is don't be creative on me, right? We don't want creative accounting. But
Absolutely. And sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to finish by saying that, so you have to think about, what are the classes of prompts? And again, those are going to be driven by your use cases. So, it gives you a framework, and then within that framework, you'll have flexibility.
And I think a couple of other things. Prompts can be part of risk. Why? Because prompts can be hacked. I don't know how many people know this, but prompts can be hacked. Uh, how does prompt hacking works? That if you have a solution and you allow the user can write certain things, which will try to tell the LLM that it has to think differently, right? It's possible. Now, solutions like us put the right safeguard into place so that that doesn't happen. Also, anything employee facing is less likely to be hacked, right? Like you can source. So anything which is outward facing. So if you're exposed to outside solution, then you got to ask what is it? What is my risk in prompt hacking and so on and so forth? What are the checks and balances that have been put there? This is not very well known. It's not happening at a high scale right now. But anyway, companies like us are vigilant and we are taking the right steps. But this is something that as a CISO you need to know and probably ask a question around. Then comes the data integration oversight, right? This is kind of question similar to question three or two, but Seth, you want to kind of
Sure.
talk about that?
Yeah, well, you need to think about how you're onboarding data sources, right? You need to think about what's the gating factor. And when we built an information architecture for an insurance company, whenever there were new projects that were coming online, they had to say, well, what are you using for your taxonomies and your information architecture and your ontologies and so on? So the stage gating should be to monitor that you don't want people making up an entirely new information architecture for their new product, right? Or for their new data source. You want to have a group of people who understand the existing architecture and know how to integrate that. And so part of this is your governance, right? You need to determine how you're going to bring on new data sets, what the architecture that's being used, and then understand downstream impacts, upstream and downstream impacts. If you don't have that understanding of where this data is in the ecosystem and what other systems may be dependent upon it, or what other upstream changes in that data source will impact things, then you're really taking a lot of risk. So reducing the risk means understanding upstream and downstream data impact, and then what are the requirements of the data source, what's the provenance, what are the usage rights, et cetera, et cetera. So and of course the architecture.
And you can also decide where the GenAI will look for information first, and then where it will look second, and where it can look third. So those kind of gatings are also possible today, right? So in our product, we can literally tell, hey, go look at, Wiki first, and then go look at, Confluence second, and then go look at SharePoint third, and the uploaded material fourth, or whatever that sequence might be. So that is possible to be done. But another very important point that you brought to the table is that things keep changing, right? It's once you approve the project, it doesn't matter that the project is going to remain same forever. It's going to move. So maybe you need to have some kind of review in 6 months time, in a year time, just to sit down and say, hey, this is what I approve for you. I want to know where you are now, right? What are you doing now? Has anything changed between then and now? In terms of the security risk that I see, right? So these are the kind of things that I think we need to be aware about, and there's a lot of transparency that needs to happen in data usage and integration. So now let's go to the next question. We are at question number
7.
7, right? So we got 4 more questions to go. What is the, you know, what happens in third-party LLMs? Obviously, everyone is using third-party LLMs, right? The only, I think, exception is if you want to do kind of, Llama 2 Llama models, which are from Facebook, offer a local version, like on-premise version. But other than that, pretty much all the one offers, you know, by the way, there's a question that came in, are there any best practices for prompts? There are, and we can share them offline with you. It's a deep topic to go into, right? But yes, there are guidelines that we follow, and we keep looking for new vulnerabilities, right? That's a area of vulnerability. So we not only have guidelines today, but in a month my guideline might change, right? Because we are continuously looking at what needs to be done there. So we can share that offline with you. Going to get back to this question, right? So what are the risks associated with using? So we already addressed the risk of data going anywhere, but any other thing here, Seth, that we need to cover?
I would just say when you're comparing one to another, those use cases still are valuable, right? Because you're trying and you can measure success by understanding what the answer will be, and sometimes the answer will be different from different language models, but you
Yes.
can also use a language model to compare those answers.
Yes.
So there is a lot of ways of kind of doing this, but testing it again against your use cases and seeing which is going to perform better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add a perspective. Multi LLM, if you different LLMs bring different thing to the table, right? Different LLMs have different value to the table, and different companies are positioning themselves differently, right? So, for example, if you go to Anthropic, CISOs here maybe want to go to Anthropic. So, what is Anthropic's positioning? Anthropic positioning is all about privacy and data security, right? Like I'm calling it positioning, right? Like that's their unique selling proposition. And now OpenAI has a different value proposition. Google offers a different value proposition, and then IBM, I think, is even backing that up with some contractual dollar figure, if I'm not wrong. So the point is that each kind of LLM brings different kind of value proposition to you, and there are choices to be made, right? Like you might want a solution where I'm going to go with this LLM because this, or I'm going to go with that LLM because of that. Actually, it is even possible for a single solution, you might be having multiple LLM. So we have implementations where a single implementation uses two LLM. And by the way, we always have a backup LLM, and we are going to talk about backup LLMs in a minute. But yes, so there are different LLMs bring different thing to a table, and it will be nice for CISOs just to at least go to the website of the major people who provide LLMs and see their positioning, right? At least know their positioning and see what they're claiming to be really good at. And if you want to go into more detailed discussion, we can help you with understanding which LLM brings what to the table. It's a more nuanced discussion and more level discussion, but it's a good question to ask. Again, I'll put it
Yeah,
that way.
and I'll make it, I want to just point something out. There's a difference between a language model and a large language model.
Yeah.
The LLM, it has many different parameters and weights, and it's a neural network. The language models that you also will get with, say, some search vendors contain thesaurus structures and terminology for entity extraction and so on. And you need to make a distinction between, because a language model will need to be fine-tuned and trimmed down and reduced. And many of the large language models that are industry specific, may not be as appropriate. So you might say, well, I'm going to use this large language model that's tuned for pharmaceutical because that's my space. It may or may not function as better than another type of language model, a large
Yeah.
language model.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an interesting topic, and I think it will behoove a lot of people to kind of know the basics and see what is emerging in the market. Keep an eye out for new LLM that are coming up. They are super hot, and they will, trust me, as you go along. There are new models. So this actually also brings an important point. Should you be locked in with one LLM or not? And my session is no. You should not place your entire bet on one LLM because new things are emerging. So companies like Rezolve AI allow you to switch LLMs and use latest LLM so that you're not locked in with any LLM. And I don't suggest locking in with any LLM. What if you lock in with a company which has chaos, right, or some problems going on, right? So that's the kind of thing that you need to be aware about. We are going to, there's a lot of agreements, but we are going to, in interest of time, let's talk about ethical AI. And this is very important because this opens up you for different kind of risk. You don't want to you want to kind of make sure that your deployment is ethical. So Seth, anything here that you want to kind of point
Yeah, I
towards?
mean, I think what is ethical, right? It's transparency and, letting people know that they're dealing with a bot, right? Don't, make them think they're not dealing with a bot when they are dealing with a bot. Making sure they're clear about data collection and usage of data, and making sure that, as a rule or as a guideline, you are trying to make sure you're not using biased data, right? So it's data bias, it's transparency, and it's being transparent both with the usage of the LLM in products or solutions or experiences, and transparency about how customer data might be used in these situations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if any flaws emerge in any solution, LLM level, you should be able to switch, right? So if you find out there's bias in any LLM at a core level, not at a solution level, but at a core level, then you should be able to take actions and switch, right? That's very important. That flexibility should be there with you. All right. Let's talk about contingency plans and this kind of, what happens if your LLM, has issues, or if your AI system is malfunctioning. I think it's a smart question to ask, right? This can happen just like any other system. Any machine that humankind has ever built has failed at some point of time, right? So how do you ensure that everything is fine? That's another, I think, is a smart question to ask, isn't it?
Oh yeah. So you are trying to monitor and enable real-time feedback, also making sure that we have a human in the loop that we can evaluate how this is performing. So getting that real-time feedback, whether it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a flagging for concern, making sure that that can get escalated to a human, and those escalation processes need to be responsive, depending upon the seriousness of the problem and the failure, and making sure that you understand, well, if something is failing, well, it's just like anything else, any other mission critical type of application, understanding what the protocols are for determining the source of that failure, and having a backup plan for when inevitably something will go wrong.
Yeah, we are building a feature called explainability. So we already have feature where you can look at the citations, where this answer is coming from, and so on and so forth. But if the bot did not give good answer, or if the people felt the answer was not good, can you go back and look why this answer was provided, right? Where did this answer come from? So we are building something called explainability, where you will be able to check and say, how did this answer come about, right? Let me look at it in a specific answer, right? You can look at that. Also, if you look at system-wide failure, right? If you say if LLM itself, LLMs sometimes go through degradation, performance degradation, right? This is again a term that you'll hear as you go along this journey. So the question to ask is, what happens if the LLM that you're using goes through performance degradation? And the answer is you should be able to switch an LLM, or you should be able to, probably that is the only answer, right? Like if the performance degradation is beyond a point, you should have. So we actually offer a backup LLM at all point. If you are buy solution from us, you have primary LLM based on your requirement, and there's a backup LLM ready to go. Boom, we can switch it up right away. So those are the kind of things that people need to think about, contingency plans for failure, right? As a CISO, I think, you need to do that. All right. Legal, contractual perspective. What does that mean for most people? Where's that does that come from? Seth, any comments here?
Well, I think a big one is copyright, right? You don't want to work with an LLM and say, you know, well, suddenly you're being liable. So there has to be some kind of a release that says that you're not, that they either own or will hold you harmless about the usage of the LLM. And in terms of that, the regulatory space is kind of far behind here, and so it's very difficult to understand what's going to be happening. But you do need to, your compliance organization is going to be trying to hold things back to make sure that they completely understand the liabilities and the potential liabilities, and your innovation groups are going to be, pushing in the other direction. And that's a healthy tension to have. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing, but it's saying, okay, what is coming on the horizon for regulatory changes? And then what do we need to do in terms of our oversight, and especially having those policies in place.
Correct. Absolutely. And all LLMs and are actually they are actually mentioning very clearly about some of the things that you mentioned. So if you're working with a standard LLM, the solution that you're working with works with a standard LLM, you should be well covered. But these are excellent points. Let's talk about the key. We are almost towards the end of the hour, so we get to let people go. But before we do that, let's talk about the key takeaways, isn't it? So here's what we discussed, right? Find out and understand your use cases. Talk to your business and technology to let them make a case what they're buying and why they're buying it. Second, understand the nature of data and information that is used for that use case. Very important. Third, review the informational architecture behind the solution. Again, this is important. Review the GenAI architecture, right? Like, are you using RAG-based architecture or not? If possible, use the RAG-based architecture with your solution. Right now, this is the gold standard of solutions. Review who has access to prompt, if need be. Some solutions don't give access to prompt, so there it will not be a problem. But you should actually check that. You should say which LLMs is your provider using. That's a good question to ask. Are you using private endpoints or not? We talked about that. Do you have a backup in case anything goes wrong? Um, you know, how will you keep updating the risk profile, right? If anything changes in the project in a year from now, 2 years from now, because the technology is moving fast, how will you update yourself? And then legal oversights, right? These are the kind of things that we discussed today. Seth, any last word before we wrap
No, I
up?
think we got to let people go because we're over time. But thank you for having me, and appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts and my experience.
Perfect. And someone asked if we can share the documentation. Yes, we will share the presentation with you. You are welcome to, book meetings with us as well if you want to. And there are a couple of other webinars coming up. But this series we will do again, right? We'll do another one for CISOs in maybe in 3 to 6 months' time, so that we keep updating you on these risks. So thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it, and have a great day.
Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.